Section 1. Michoacán before the uprising, a state held hostage. In the western part of Mexico, there is a region called Tierra Caliente. The name means hot land in Spanish, and anyone who has ever set foot there understands why. The sun beats down on low valleys and flat farmland where temperatures regularly climb past 100 degrees. The region stretches across parts of the state of Michoacán, and for most of its history, it was known for one thing above all else: farming. Michoacán is one of Mexico's most important agricultural states. The volcanic soil and the warm climate make it perfect for growing crops that the rest of the world wants to buy. Limes are one of the biggest. Michoacán produces roughly 38% of all the limes grown in Mexico, with more than 950,000 tons harvested in a single year. Avocados are even bigger. The state accounts for about 75% of Mexico's total avocado production, and Mexico itself produces nearly half of all the avocados on the planet. In Tierra Caliente and the surrounding highlands, farmers also grow mangoes, corn, sugarcane, and coconuts. Cattle ranchers raise livestock on the dry flatlands. For generations, families in towns like Tepalcatepec, La Ruana, Buena Vista Tomatlan, and Apatzingán built their lives around these crops. They woke up early. They worked the orchards. They sold their harvest at local markets or through packing houses that shipped the fruit across the country and beyond. It was hard work, but it was honest, and it was theirs. That changed. So to understand what happened to these farming communities, you need to understand what came before the nightmare. In the 1980s, a group formed in Michoacán that called itself a vigilante organization. Its original purpose, or at least what its founders claimed, was to bring order to the state and protect local people from outside criminal groups. The group eventually became known as La Familia Michoacana. It was founded by a man named Carlos Rosales Mendoza, and after he was arrested in 2004, leadership passed to a man who would become one of the most unusual and dangerous drug lords in Mexican history. His name was Nazario Moreno Gonzalez. People called him El Chayo or El Más Loco, which translates to the craziest one. Moreno Gonzalez was born on March 8, 1970, in Apatzingán, Michoacán. Religion was a major part of his upbringing. As a teenager, he moved to the United States, but he eventually fled back to Mexico to avoid drug trafficking charges. When he returned, he did not come back as a quiet man. He came back as a preacher. He wrote his own book of teachings, a kind of personal Bible that mixed ideas from evangelical Christianity with his own philosophy about life, loyalty, and justice. He gave copies of this book to his followers. He told them that La Familia Michoacana existed to protect the people of Michoacán from outsiders, especially from a rival cartel called Los Zetas, who had been sent into the state by the Gulf Cartel to take control of the drug trade. And for a while, some people believed him. Moreno Gonzalez gave money to the poor. He set up curfews in certain towns. He punished drug addicts and local criminals. And he built a reputation as a protector, a kind of messiah figure for the poorest communities in Tierra Caliente. In the region around Apatzingán, people built altars with statues and photos in his honor. They called him Saint Nazario. Villagers later said they had been forced to worship these shrines under threat from armed cartel members, but the cult around Moreno Gonzalez was real, and it was powerful. Behind the image of the Holy Protector, La Familia Michoacana was a drug cartel, a major one. They produced massive amounts of methamphetamine in secret laboratories across the state and shipped it to the United States. They trafficked cocaine, and they extorted every business, every farmer, and every family they could reach. The organization announced itself to the world in 2006 in one of the most disturbing ways imaginable. The cartel gunmen walked into a nightclub called Sol y Sombra in the city of Uruapan and threw 5 severed human heads onto the dance floor. Alongside the heads, they left a message claiming this was divine justice. That was La Familia Michoacana. In December 2010, the Mexican government reported that Nazario Moreno Gonzalez had been killed in a 2-day gun battle with federal police in Michoacan. It was considered one of the biggest victories in the drug war. But there was a problem. No body was ever recovered. For years, rumors spread that Moreno Gonzalez was still alive. Those rumors turned out to be true. He was not confirmed dead until March 9, 2014, when he was killed in a second shootout with security forces and his identity was verified through fingerprint testing. But back in 2010, when the government claimed he was dead, something happened inside the cartel. The leadership split. One faction, led by a man named José de Jesús Méndez Vargas, tried to keep La Familia Michoacana running as it was. Another faction, led by Servando Gómez Martínez and Enrique Plancarte Solís, broke away and formed a new organization. They called it Los Caballeros Templarios, the Knights Templar. Servando Gómez Martínez, known as La Tuta, had been a schoolteacher before he became a drug lord. He co-founded the Knights Templar in March 2011, and from the very beginning, the group presented itself as something more than a criminal organization. They modeled themselves after the medieval Knights Templar, the famous Catholic military order from the Crusades. They created a 22-page book of rules and codes decorated with images of knights on horseback, carrying lances and crosses. The book was titled The Code of the Knights Templar of Michoacan, and it was handed out to all members and even to the public. Members swore to help the poor and helpless, fight against materialism, respect women and children, not kill for money, and not use drugs. The cartel even drug-tested its own members. None of it was real. Behind the codes and the Crusader costumes, the Knights Templar did exactly what La Familia Michoacana had done, only worse. They took over every aspect of daily life in Michoacan, and the way they did it was through a system of extortion so thorough, so total, that it touched virtually every person in the state. The extortion worked like this. If you were a corn farmer, or the Knights Templar forced you to sell your corn to them at 3 pesos per kilogram, they then turned around and sold that same corn to tortilla makers at 6 pesos per kilogram. You had no choice in the matter. If you were a lime farmer, you paid a percentage on every ton of limes you grew. If you grew avocados, same thing. If you ran a store, you paid a monthly fee. If you owned a restaurant, you paid. If you operated a gas station, you paid. Builders paid. Taxi drivers paid. Even the smallest businesses in the smallest towns paid. The Knights Templar did not ask. They demanded. And if you refused to pay, the consequences were simple and brutal. Arson, kidnapping, murder. This was not a hidden operation. The cartel ran Michoacan like a parallel government. They decided which farmers could harvest their crops and on which days. They decided who could sell to whom and at what price. They manned armed checkpoints on roads throughout the state where they stopped cars, searched drivers, and collected payments. They controlled the port of Lázaro Cárdenas, the largest container port on Mexico's Pacific coast, which they used to import drug ingredients from Asia for their methamphetamine labs and to export illegal iron ore to China. The money from extortion alone was staggering. By some estimates, the Knights Templar and their predecessor La Familia Michoacana collected protection payments from roughly 85% of all legal businesses in the state of Michoacan. But extortion was only part of the terror. The Knights Templar kidnapped people for ransom. They murdered people who refused to cooperate or who spoke to authorities. They raped women and girls. In March 2014, Mexican authorities arrested a Knights Templar operative who was suspected of kidnapping children and adults to harvest their organs. The cartel displayed bodies in public as a warning. Beheadings and other brutal killings were used to terrorize anyone who might think about resisting. And the government did nothing. Or worse, the government was part of it. Local police in many towns across Michoacan were on the cartel's payroll. Mayors and other officials either cooperated with the Knights Templar out of fear or because they were being paid. Multiple politicians were later found to have direct ties to the cartel's leader, La Tuta, including through secretly recorded videos that La Tuta himself released to embarrass and control them. Federal forces had been present in the state since President Felipe Calderón launched Mexico's drug war in 2006, using Michoacán as one of his first targets because it was his home state. But despite thousands of soldiers and federal police being deployed, the violence only got worse. The government could not stop the extortion. It could not protect the farmers. It could not keep the roads safe. In many parts of Tierra Caliente, the Mexican state simply did not function. The people of Michoacán were trapped. They could not go to the police because the police worked for the cartel. They could not go to the army because the army came and went. And when it left, the cartel came back stronger. They could not leave because their farms, their homes, and their families were there. And they could not pay what the cartel demanded because the extortion was bleeding them dry. Lime farmers who once earned a living from their orchards were now handing over most of their income to armed men who showed up at their doors. Families that had worked the same land for generations were being told when they could and could not harvest their own crops. The quotas, as the cartel called them, were not optional. They were not negotiable. And they were not occasional. They were constant. Month after month, year after year, the people of Tierra Caliente lived under a system that stripped them of their money, their safety, their dignity, and in many cases, their lives. In towns like Tepalcatepec and La Ruana, farmers would later say that the cartel fees left them without enough money to feed their families. What a lime farmer who grew his crop on his own land, with his own hands, and sold it through his own contacts, had to give a cut to the Knights Templar for the right to do something he had been doing his entire life. And if he refused, the cartel did not send a letter or file a complaint. They sent men with guns. This was everyday life in Michoacán by 2012. Not for a week, not for a month, for years. The Knights Templar had been squeezing the state since 2011, and their predecessor, La Familia Michoacana, had been doing it for years before that. An entire generation of children grew up knowing nothing but cartel rule. Teenagers in places like Buenavista Tomatlan and Apatzingan lived in towns where armed convoys rolled through the streets openly, where gunfire was a normal sound, and where people simply disappeared and nobody asked questions, because asking questions could get you killed. And in the middle of all of this, two men were watching. Two men who had already lost more than most people could imagine. One was a doctor in the town of Tepalcatepec who had been kidnapped by the cartel and had seen members of his own family murdered. The other was a lime farmer in the town of La Ruana who watched as armed strangers took control of his orchards and told his son he could not sell his own harvest. Neither man knew what the other was planning. Neither man knew that within months they would start something that would change the course of Mexico's drug war. But that comes next. What matters now is understanding what these two men were looking at. They were looking at a state that had been swallowed whole by organized crime. A place where the cartel was the law. The government was either absent or complicit, and ordinary people had been left completely alone to survive under a system built to take everything they had. Michoacán was not just a state with a crime problem, it was a state under occupation, and nobody was coming to help. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Section 2. The Doctor, Dr. José Manuel Mireles, before the war. José Manuel Mireles Valverde was born on October the 24th, 1958, in the state of Michoacán, Mexico. He grew up in the Tierra Caliente region, in and around the small town of Tepalcatepec. It was a place where most people worked the land. They grew limes and raised cattle, and lived simple lives built around family, faith, and farming. Mireles came from that world, but he wanted something different. He wanted to be a doctor. He studied medicine at the Universidad Michoacana de San Nicolás de Hidalgo, one of the oldest universities in the Americas, located in the state capital of Morelia. He trained as a surgeon. When he finished his medical education, he returned to Tepalcatepec and opened a practice there, serving the local community as a physician. In a rural part of Mexico where access to healthcare was limited and hospitals were far away, a surgeon in town was not just useful, he was essential. Mireles treated injuries, he helped with emergencies, he delivered babies. The people of Tepalcatepec knew him as their doctor, and they respected him for it. But Mireles' early years were not without trouble. In 1988, when he was around 30 years old, he served time in prison. The circumstances of his arrest have been reported differently, depending on the source. Some media outlets stated that he was imprisoned for producing marijuana. Mireles himself denied that version. He said his imprisonment was for practicing medicine in Michoacán without a yet active state license. The exact truth is disputed, but what is not disputed is that the experience marked him. He had a criminal record, and that would follow him for the rest of his life. His critics would bring it up every chance they got, and his supporters would dismiss it as irrelevant to the man he became. After his time in prison, Mireles left Mexico. He traveled to the United States, where he settled in Modesto, California, a mid-sized city in the Central Valley surrounded by almond orchards and dairy farms. He lived there with his family for roughly a decade, from the late 1990s into the 2000s. Life in California was not glamorous. Mireles could not practice medicine in the United States without an American license, so he worked other jobs. He volunteered with the Red Cross. He worked as a social activist. He lived the quiet life of a Mexican immigrant in a farming community in the middle of California, far from the violence that was building back home. But Tepalcatepec never left his mind. His roots were there. His people were there. And sometime around 2007, Mireles made the decision to go back. According to one report, part of the reason he returned was so that his son, who was in his mid-20s at the time, could attend medical school in Mexico. Or another part of the reason was political. Mireles had developed an interest in politics during his years abroad, and when he returned to Mexico, he acted on it. In 2006, he ran for a seat in the Mexican Senate with the left-wing party of the Democratic Revolution, known as the PRD. He did not win, but the run showed something about Mireles that would matter later. He was not a man who sat on the sidelines. He was someone who believed he could change things. Whether through medicine, activism, or politics, he kept putting himself in the middle of whatever fight needed fighting. When Mireles came back to Tepalcatepec, the town he returned to was not the town he had left. The drug cartels had moved in. First it was La Familia Michoacana, and then, starting around 2011, it was the Knights Templar. The cartel presence was not subtle. It was everywhere. Armed men drove through the streets in convoys. Businesses were being forced to pay extortion fees every month. Farmers could not sell their own crops without paying a cut to the cartel. People were being kidnapped for ransom, and the violence was getting worse by the month. Mireles went back to what he knew. He reopened his medical practice in Tepalcatepec and started seeing patients again. Every morning, he was a doctor. He later described his routine to a journalist in a way that would become one of the most well-known quotes of the entire autodefensa movement. Speaking at his Tepalcatepec office in November 2013, he told Vice News, "I attend to my patients every day from 7 in the morning till noon, but after noon, I go to war." That quote came later, and in the years between his return in 2007 and the uprising in 2013, Mireles was just a doctor watching his community fall apart. And during those years, the cartel did not just terrorize the people around him. It came for him personally. According to Mireles' own account, which he repeated in multiple interviews and which is recorded on his Wikipedia page, in the documentary Cartel Land, and in his 2017 book, Todos Somos Autodefensas, he was kidnapped by the Knights Templar cartel. The cartel demanded money to release him. He survived the ordeal. But the experience changed him. Being held captive by the same men who were terrorizing his neighbors and his patients was not something a person walks away from unchanged. But the kidnapping was not the worst of it. Mireles also stated that several of his family members were murdered by the cartel. He did not go into extensive public detail about which family members were killed or the exact circumstances of their deaths. The sources that cover his story, including his Wikipedia biography, his Find a Grave memorial, the Christian Science Monitor, Mexico News Daily, and multiple Mexican news outlets, all confirm that he described the murders of relatives as a central part of his motivation for taking up arms. His own words were clear. He said he joined the self-defense groups because of the abuse of the Knights Templar cartel against himself and his family, including being kidnapped and having several family members murdered. The director of Cartel Land, Matthew Heineman, was asked about these claims in a 2015 interview. He acknowledged that the details of Mireles' kidnapping and family murders were not totally substantiated, but noted that, like everybody else in Michoacán, Mireles had been deeply affected by the violence and had seen it firsthand. This is worth noting because it speaks to the fog that surrounds much of what happened in Tierra Caliente during those years. Records were poor, police reports were unreliable because the police themselves were working with the cartel. Many crimes were never officially documented because reporting a crime to the authorities could get you killed. What is clear is that Mireles experienced the same reign of terror that every other person in Tepalcatepec experienced, and that his personal losses were significant enough to push him from being a doctor who treated the wounded to a man who was willing to pick up a gun. There was one more thing that pushed Mireles toward the edge. As a physician, he treated the victims of cartel violence, and some of those victims were women and girls who had been kidnapped and sexually assaulted by members of the Knights Templar. Mireles spoke about this publicly in a video testimony that was posted on the internet and later quoted by Time magazine in 2013. Mireles described how cartel members would show up at people's homes and demand their daughters. His description was specific and horrifying. He said that cartel members would arrive at a family's house and tell the parents to bathe their daughter because she was going to stay with them for a while, or the girl would not be returned until she was pregnant. Mireles called the cartel's systematic use of rape the final spark that made the people of Tepalcatepec decide to take up guns. For a doctor, this kind of knowledge is uniquely painful. A farmer sees the extortion, a businessman feels the quotas, but a doctor sees the damage up close. He sees the bruises and the broken bones and the trauma on the faces of the women and girls who are brought to his office after the cartel is done with them. He sees the injuries that nobody talks about in public. He stitches the wounds and sets the bones and listens to the stories and sends his patients home, knowing that the men who did this to them are still driving around town with guns and that nobody is going to stop them. That was Mireles' life from 2007 to early 2013. A doctor in a town under siege, a man who had been kidnapped, a man who had lost family members to murder, a man who treated the cartel's victims every morning and then sat alone in the evening knowing that the next day would bring more of the same. He was not a soldier. He had never been in the military. He was not a cartel member or a gang leader or a professional fighter of any kind. He was a 54-year-old physician with a gray beard and a lanky frame who wore jeans and cowboy boots and worked out of a small-town medical office. He had a wife of 27 years and grown children, including a daughter named Brianna. He had a complicated past that included time in prison and a decade in California and a failed Senate campaign. He was, by most measures, an ordinary man living an extraordinary nightmare. But there was something else about Mireles that set him apart from most of the other people suffering in Tepalcatepec. He had a voice. He was educated. He was articulate. He was respected. People in the community knew him and trusted him because he had been their doctor for years. He had the kind of credibility that cannot be faked. When a surgeon who has spent his life saving people tells you that the situation is bad enough to pick up a gun, you listen. And Mireles was reaching the point where he was ready to say exactly that. He would later tell journalists that the people of Tierra Caliente had been presented with a simple choice. They could die tied up like animals, or they could die dismembered, or they could die fighting. He believed the best option was to die fighting, but he had not made the decision yet. Not in 2007, not in 2010, not even in 2012, when the extortion and the violence and the kidnappings were at their worst. Something was still holding him back. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was the hope that the government would eventually step in. Maybe it was the knowledge that once you pick up a gun and point it at a cartel, there is no going back. Your life as a doctor is over. Your life as a father and a husband is over. Your life, period, could be over at any moment. What finally pushed Mireles past the point of no return came in the months before February 2013. According to one account, 3 of his neighbors in Tepalcatepec were beheaded by the Knights Templar, 3 people who lived near him, 3 people he probably knew by name, in a town small enough that everybody knows everybody. Their heads were cut off as a message. A message to the whole town. Do not resist. Do not talk. Do not even think about standing up. For most people, a message like that works. It keeps them quiet. It keeps them obedient. It keeps them paying the quotas and keeping their heads down and praying that the violence skips their house this week. For Mireles, it had the opposite effect. He had been kidnapped. He had lost family members to murder. He had treated women and girls who had been raped by cartel members. He had watched his neighbors get beheaded. And now he was looking around at a town full of people who were too scared to do anything about it, and a government that was either too weak or too corrupt to help. Something broke inside him. Or maybe something clicked into place. Either way, by early 2013, the doctor from Tepalcatepec had made his decision. He was done waiting. He was done hoping. He was done being the man who stitched up the wounds and sent his patients back into the same war zone that had hurt them in the first place. He did not know it yet, but roughly 2 hours away, in the small town of La Ruana, a lime farmer named Hipólito Mora was coming to the exact same conclusion at the exact same time. The 2 men did not know each other well. They had no shared history and no coordinated plan. But they were both looking at the same broken state, the same absent government, and the same cartel that had taken everything from the people they loved. And they were both about to do the one thing that nobody in Michoacán had dared to do. They were going to fight back. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Section 3. The Lime Farmer, Hipólito Mora, and the Breaking Point. Hipólito Mora Chavez was born on July 26, 1955, in a small community called Felipe Carrillo Puerto. Most people knew it by its other name, La Ruana. It sat in the municipality of Buenavista Tomatlan, in the heart of Michoacán's Tierra Caliente region, and it was the kind of place where nobody locked their doors because there was nothing to be afraid of. La Ruana was a farming town. The people who lived there grew limes, they raised cattle, they worked the fields from sunrise to sunset, and lived quiet lives built around the soil. Mora grew up in that world. He was not educated the way Mireles was. He did not go to a university. He did not become a doctor or a lawyer or a politician. He was a farmer. Specifically, he was a lime grower. But he came into the lime business through his older brother, and for most of his adult life, he worked a 14-hectare ranch on the rolling hills outside La Ruana, growing limes with his family. He was a father of 11 children. 5 of them eventually moved to the United States. The rest stayed in Michoacán. His life was the land, and the land was limes. But like Mireles, Mora's past was not clean. He had spent time in the United States, and not all of it was legal. According to the newspaper Reforma, and later confirmed in his Wikipedia biography and by Borderland Beat, Mora was imprisoned twice in the United States for drug possession. The first arrest came on June 22, 1989, and he was sentenced to 4 years in prison. In 1993, he was arrested again for the same type of offense. In 1995, he was deported back to Mexico because of his criminal record. Mexico News Daily also reported that Mora spent periods of his life in jail, both in Mexico and the United States, for crimes including kidnapping and drug possession. These facts mattered because they would be used against Mora for the rest of his life. Every time he spoke up against the cartels, every time he appeared on television or ran for office, his critics would point to his criminal record and ask whether a man with drug convictions had any right to call himself a defender of the people. Mora never hid from it. He acknowledged that he had been in trouble with the law, but he also believed that what he had done in the past did not cancel out what he was doing now, and what he was doing now was trying to save his town. Not after Mora was deported from the United States in 1995, he returned to La Ruana and went back to the only life he had ever really known: farming. He tended his lime orchards. He raised his children. He lived simply. And for a while, that was enough. Mora later told The Intercept about what life in La Ruana used to be like before the cartels. His memory of it was almost innocent. He said that in the old days, he could have gone outside at night and slept in the streets, and nobody would have bothered him. That was La Ruana before the violence, a place where a man could fall asleep in the open air and wake up safely. That peace ended around the year 2000, when Mexico's political landscape shifted and the old arrangements between the government and the drug trade began to fall apart. Well, by the time the Knights Templar cartel took over from La Familia Michoacana around 2011, Tierra Caliente had become a place of constant fear. In La Ruana, the cartel did not just demand money, it took over the entire agricultural system. Mora described this in detail in interviews. The Knights Templar cartel seized control of the lime orchards in the region. They did not physically take the land, but they did something almost worse. They decided when farmers could harvest, and they decided when farmers could not. Mora explained to The Intercept how the system worked. The Templars would call 4 or 5 businessmen who owned the packing houses, the places where farmers brought their limes to be sorted, boxed, and shipped. The cartel would tell these packing house owners when farmers were allowed to cut limes, sometimes 3 times a week, sometimes twice, sometimes only once. The cartel controlled the schedule. The cartel controlled the supply. And by controlling the supply, the cartel controlled the price. They ran a price-fixing operation that strangled the local lime market and squeezed every last peso out of the farmers who depended on it. This was on top of the regular extortion. Farmers paid a cut on every ton of limes they produced. Businesses in town paid monthly fees. Everyone in the supply chain, from the person picking the limes to the truck driver hauling them to market, had to pay something to the Knights Templar. And if they did not pay, the consequences were violent and swift. For Mora, the breaking point came when the cartel's control reached his own family. According to Mora's own account, or which he told in interviews and which is recorded in his Wikipedia biography, he came home one day and found his son, Manuel, lying in a hammock with his hands on his head. Manuel was not sleeping. He was defeated. Mora asked his son what was wrong. Manuel told him that the owners of the packing houses had refused to receive his harvest. His son had grown limes on their family's land with his own hands, and when he tried to bring them to market, he was told no. The packing houses would not take them. Not because there was anything wrong with the limes, not because the market was full, because the Templars had not given permission. Mora went straight to the owner of the packing house. He brought his pistol. He confronted the man and demanded to know why his son's harvest had been rejected. The packing house owner told him the truth. The real bosses were the Templars. The packing house did not make the decisions. The cartel did. Mora told the man that he did not care. He told him that his son would be back the next day and the packing house would receive his harvest. He did not know how the owner was going to make it happen, but it was going to happen. That moment was important because it showed something about Mora's character. He was not a man who backed down. He was not a man who negotiated politely with people who had taken away his son's ability to work. He was a farmer who had been pushed past his limit, and when he got there, he reached for a gun instead of a phone. But the incident with Manuel was not just one bad day. It was the product of years of suffocation. For more than a decade, Mora had watched as organized crime tightened its grip on the Tierra Caliente. The Intercept described how the cartel shook down the low-wage lime pickers who made up much of the local workforce. The lime industry was the backbone of La Ruana's economy. Mora himself had said it. Here, just like the rest of the region, the lime provides most of the work. When the cartel controlled the limes, it controlled everything. During La Familia Michoacana's rise, the Tierra Caliente had experienced an agricultural boom. The value of limes had nearly doubled, in large part because of exports to the United States. Farmers were making more money than they had in years. But when the Knights Templar took over, they destroyed that progress. Their price-fixing campaign crushed the local market. Farmers who had been on the edge of real prosperity were dragged back into poverty by men with guns who decided that every dollar the farmer earned had to be shared. Mora watched all of this happen. He watched his neighbors get poorer. He watched families in La Ruana struggle to feed their children because they could not sell their own crops at a fair price. He watched as the cartel collected extortion payments from every business and every farmer in town, month after month, year after year. And he watched as the government did nothing. The police were useless. Local cops in Buena Vista Tomatlan and the surrounding areas were widely believed to be on the cartel's payroll. The military came and went. Federal forces had been deployed to Michoacán since President Felipe Calderón launched his drug war in 2006, but they had not stopped the extortion or the violence. If anything, the situation had gotten worse. The cartels had diversified their income beyond drugs. As early as 2004, according to the description of Mireles' own book, the cartels in Michoacán had expanded into extortion, kidnapping, pillage, and even rape and torture. By 2012, these crimes were a daily reality across the Tierra Caliente. Mora was not a patient man to begin with, and the years of abuse had worn his patience down to nothing. He was 57 years old. He had 11 children. He had a ranch and lime orchards, and a life that should have been simple and good. Instead, he was living under an occupation where armed strangers told his son when he could and could not pick fruit off his own trees. After the incident with Manuel and the packing house, something changed. So Mora began talking. Not publicly, not yet. But quietly, behind closed doors, he started reaching out to other people in the region who felt the same way he did. People who were tired of paying. People who were tired of being afraid. People who were ready to do something about it. Then came a phone call. According to Mora's account on Wikipedia, after the packing house confrontation, he received a call from a friend in Tepalcatepec. This friend told Mora that there were already people interested in talking to him. The friend did not say much more than that, but the meaning was clear. Something was being organized. Something was coming together, and the people behind it wanted Mora to be part of it. The friend in Tepalcatepec was connected to the same network that would produce the Autodefensa movement. The two towns, La Ruana and Tepalcatepec, were roughly 2 hours apart by road. They were both in the Tierra Caliente. They were both being crushed by the same cartel. And in both towns, there were men who had been pushed past the point where fear could hold them back. Mora did not need much convincing. He had already made his decision. The phone call from Tepalcatepec simply confirmed what he already knew. There were others like him, others who were done waiting for the government, others who were done paying the cartel, others who were ready to fight. In the weeks before February 24, 2013, Mora began preparing. He did not have a formal military plan. He did not have advanced weapons or training or outside funding. What he had was something simpler and more powerful. He had a community full of people who had been robbed and threatened and humiliated for years, and who were finally angry enough to listen when a lime farmer told them it was time to stand up. According to his Wikipedia biography, Mora hired an advertising vehicle, the kind with loudspeakers mounted on the roof that drives slowly through town, making announcements. He used it to invite his neighbors to a meeting in the town center. The purpose of the meeting was simple. He was going to ask them to rise up against the Knights Templar. This was an act of extraordinary courage, or extraordinary recklessness, or both. In a town controlled by the cartel, publicly calling people to a meeting to discuss rebellion was essentially painting a target on your own head. And if the Templars found out what Mora was planning before the people of La Ruana could organize themselves, he would be dead. His family would be in danger. Everyone who showed up to the meeting would be in danger. But Mora did it anyway, because by early 2013, the fear of doing nothing had become greater than the fear of doing something. The lime farmer from La Ruana had spent his whole life working the land. He had raised 11 children. He had survived prison in the United States and deportation and years of cartel extortion. He had watched his son sit in a hammock with his head in his hands because armed men would not let him sell his own harvest. And he had decided, finally and completely, that he would rather die fighting than go on living like this. He did not know that 2 hours away, in Tepalcatepec, a doctor named José Manuel Mireles was coming to the same decision at almost exactly the same time. The two men had been connected by that phone call, but they had not sat down together to plan a coordinated assault. They were two separate men in two separate towns, driven by two separate sets of losses, arriving at the same impossible conclusion. On February 24, 2013, both of them would act on it, and the entire state of Michoacán would never be the same. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Section 4. February 24, 2013. The day the people rose up. February 24, 2013 was a Sunday. In Mexico, Sundays are family days. People go to church. They eat together. They rest. In the Tierra Caliente region of Michoacán, where the heat rarely lets up and the towns are small enough that everyone recognizes everyone else, a Sunday afternoon is normally quiet. This Sunday was different. In the small town of La Ruana, in the municipality of Buena Vista Tomatlan, Hipólito Mora had spent the days leading up to this moment preparing. He had hired an advertising vehicle, the kind with loudspeakers bolted to the roof, and driven it through the streets of La Ruana, inviting his neighbors to come to a meeting in the town center. The message was simple. It was time to talk about the Knights Templar. It was time to talk about what they were going to do. On that Sunday afternoon, Mora stood in the town square of La Ruana and rallied a growing crowd of people. According to an academic study published in the Cambridge Journal of Latin American Studies, the people who gathered that day were armed with shotguns and hunting rifles. These were not military weapons. They were the kind of guns that farmers keep in their homes for hunting birds or scaring off coyotes. Old guns, simple guns, the kind of weapons that would be outmatched in seconds by the assault rifles and armored vehicles that the Knights Templar cartel had at its disposal. But it did not matter. The people of La Ruana had decided that anything was better than living the way they had been living. Years of extortion, years of being told when they could harvest their own limes, years of watching their neighbors get kidnapped or killed, years of paying fees to armed men who gave nothing in return except the promise that they would not burn your house down this month. Mora led the crowd out of the town square and into the streets, and they fanned out through La Ruana, searching for Templars. What happened next surprised almost everyone. The group took La Ruana without firing a single shot. According to the Cambridge study, the cartel members who had been operating in town fled as soon as they heard about the uprising. They did not fight. They did not stand their ground. They ran. The Knights Templar, who had terrorized this town for years, who had controlled its economy and its daily life and its people through violence and fear, abandoned their positions the moment the people stood up together and said no more. That was La Ruana. But what was happening in La Ruana was not happening alone. Roughly 2 hours away by road, in the town of Tepalcatepec, a different version of the same story was unfolding at almost the same time. And according to the Cambridge study, and confirmed by a detailed account in the Grokopedia article on Mireless, a pivotal assembly took place that day at the Livestock Union Hall in Tepalcatepec. It started in the morning with approximately 80 people from the local Ranchers Association. These were cattlemen and farmers, the kind of people who wore cowboy hats and boots and spent their days in the fields. They gathered at the hall and began to organize. Weapons were distributed. White T-shirts were handed out. On the front of each T-shirt were the words, Polizia Comunitaria, which means community police. On the back, the shirts read, Por un Tepalcatepec libre, meaning for a free Tepalcatepec. The people who put on those shirts were making a statement that could not be taken back. They were declaring themselves a force opposed to the cartel. They were putting targets on their own chests. Dr. Jose Manuel Mireles was there. He had been secretly forming this self-defense group in the months before, according to the Christian Science Monitor. He had organized meetings. He had gathered support. And now, on this Sunday, he stepped forward as the central figure of the Tepalcatepec uprising. He was 54 years old, he was a doctor, and he was about to become the most visible face of an armed rebellion against one of Mexico's most powerful drug cartels. The meeting at the Livestock Union Hall did not go entirely smoothly. According to the Cambridge study, a group of Templar sicarios, which means hired gunmen, interrupted the meeting. Unlike La Ruana, where the cartel had fled, in Tepalcatepec, the Templars tried to stop what was happening. But the sicarios were subdued by the vigilantes with help from an army patrol that was in the area. The Mexican military, which had been deployed to Michoacán since 2006, was nearby. On that day, the soldiers did not try to stop the autodefensas. They helped them. Once the Templar gunmen were dealt with, the Tepalcatepec autodefensas did what the people of La Ruana had done. They went house by house through their town, searching for Knights Templar members. According to the Sage Journal article on insurgent vigilantism by researcher Michael Wolff, the first order of action for the autodefenses in both towns was to forcefully expel all known Knights Templar leaders. They searched for them house by house. They also detained local government officials and police officers who were accused of corruption and confiscated their weapons and equipment. Then, they set up barricades and checkpoints on all the roads going in and out of town. As the morning meeting at the Livestock Union Hall grew, so did the crowd. According to the Grokopedia article, what started with approximately 80 people in the morning had expanded to over 2,000 by the afternoon, as word spread through Tepalcatepec. People came from their homes, from their ranches, from the surrounding countryside. They came because they had heard that something was finally happening, that someone was finally standing up, that the nightmare might finally be ending. 2,000 people in a small Mexican town on a Sunday afternoon were armed with hunting rifles and shotguns and whatever else they could find, standing together in defiance of a cartel that had killed and kidnapped and extorted them for years. The Christian Science Monitor reported that inside Tepalcatepec, after the uprising, merchants voiced relief that the extortion had been lifted. A dry goods store owner named Vicente Diaz told the paper what life had been like under the Templars. He said that if you did not pay, they ran you out of town or they chopped off your head. Residents described a system where accountants working for the cartel charged store owners a monthly fee, imposed a tax on all vehicles, put a tariff on each crate of harvested fruit, and had even been preparing to tax housing based on square footage. One resident named Amador Cuevas, a cheese vendor, said the cartel had come into his mother's house with a tape measure. The uprising of February 24th was not limited to La Ruana and Tepalcatepec. Within weeks, the nearby town of Buenavista Tomatlan, the municipality that La Ruana belongs to, also joined the movement. The autodefensas, as they now called themselves, were spreading, and the Templars were not going to take it quietly. In the days and weeks after February 24th, the Knights Templar struck back, hard. According to the Cambridge study, the Templars laid siege to La Ruana, Tepalcatepec, and Buenavista Tomatlan. For several months, the autodefensas withstood attacks by caravans of sicarios who were sent from Templar strongholds in Apatzingan, Aguililla, Arteaga, and Tumbiscatillo. These were not small skirmishes. The cartel sent convoys of pickup trucks loaded with armed men into the areas surrounding the autodefensa-controlled towns and attacked. The Templars also tried to strangle the uprising economically. They set up blockades around the rebellious towns, cutting off supplies. The Intercept reported that these blockades triggered shortages of food, gasoline, and medicine. The Christian Science Monitor described how the cartel cut off gasoline supplies to Tepalcatepec for 5 weeks during the autumn of 2013. A gas station owner who asked not to be named for fear of his life told the paper that the cartel wanted $1,000 a month from him and other station owners. Mora's forces in La Ruana erected improvised stone barricades at the entrances to the town, according to the Associated Press, where they hung banners on the roads into La Ruana that read, "SOS, Women and Children in Danger." It was a call for help, a plea to anyone who was paying attention, and Mireles became the voice. Because he was a doctor, because he was educated, because he was articulate and charismatic, Mireles quickly became the most visible figure of the entire autodefensa movement. He gave interviews. He appeared on magazine covers. He spoke on television. People across Mexico began to learn his name. They called him El Doctor. He became the spokesman for what was now being called the General Council of Self-Defense and Community Police Forces of Michoacán. The farmer Mora was the backbone of the uprising in La Ruana. The Dr. Mireles was its public face. In an interview from his Tepalcatepec office in November 2013, Mireles described his daily life to a Vice News photographer who spent 5 days embedded with him. In the morning, he was a doctor. He saw patients from 7 until noon. In the afternoon, he was a commander. He organized patrols. He directed strategy. He moved between towns in convoys of armed pickup trucks. His life had split in two. One half was the medical practice he had built over decades. The other half was a war. Despite the cartel's retaliation, the movement grew. The initial uprisings in La Ruana and Tepalcatepec inspired communities across the Tierra Caliente and the Sierra Costa region to form their own autodefensa groups. According to the Cambridge study, these included towns like Coalcomán, Aguililla, Chiniquila, Los Reyes, and Aquila. Many of these new groups were formed with the strategic or armed support of the original autodefensas from Tepalcatepec and La Ruana. The researcher Michael Wolff, writing in the Sage Journal, reported that the autodefensas in Tepalcatepec and La Ruana had begun meeting secretly as much as 3 years before the uprising, discussing possible plans for rebellion, but struggling to convince their peers to commit. Mora told Wolff in an interview that everyone he approached in those early days said it was suicide. They said the Templars would kill everyone. The Cheran uprising of 2011, in which residents of an indigenous Purepecha town banded together to shut down an illegal logging operation and chase out their corrupt mayor, had provided an important example. Mora told Wolff that the Cheran uprising taught them that it was possible. By the end of 2013, some autodefensa groups had embarked on what the Cambridge study called a liberation campaign across Michoacán. They left independent units in each community they captured from the cartel. The ranks of the movement, according to the academic study published by the European Review of Latin American and Caribbean Studies, swelled from just a few hundred members on February 24th to thousands within months. By early 2014, they would be present in roughly a third of Michoacán's municipalities. Catholic priests played a role in supporting the movement. In Apatzingán, a priest known as Padre Goyo openly backed the autodefensas and criticized the cartel. According to the National Catholic Reporter, some priests in Michoacán went as far as telling their parishioners from the pulpit to arm themselves against the cartel. And the Catholic Church in Michoacán had a long history of involvement in popular uprisings, stretching back to the Cristero War of the 1920s. And in 2013, some members of the clergy once again threw their support behind a civilian rebellion. At the entrance to Buenavista Tomatlán, a warning sign was erected showing 3 coffins. Above the coffins, it read, "Territory free of Templarios." February 24, 2013, was the day 2 towns said no. It was the day a lime farmer in La Ruana and a doctor in Tepalcatepec decided, independently but almost simultaneously, that the only option left was to fight. It was the day ordinary people armed themselves with hunting rifles and homemade barricades and white t-shirts and stood up against a cartel that had controlled their lives for years. It was not a clean victory. The Knights Templar did not disappear overnight. The siege lasted for months. People died on both sides. The autodefensas were outgunned and undersupplied and completely on their own for weeks before any outside help arrived. But the uprising held. La Ruana held. Tepalcatepec held. And the flame that was lit on that Sunday spread to town after town after town. The people of Michoacán had done something that nobody believed was possible. They had fought back. Now the question was whether anyone would help them survive what came next. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Section 5. The War. Farmers versus Cartel across Tierra Caliente. After the uprisings of February 24, 2013, there was no going back. La Ruana and Tepalcatepec had declared war on the Knights Templar cartel, not with armies, not with tanks, not with the backing of any government, with farmers, with doctors, with hunting rifles and pickup trucks, and homemade barricades built from sandbags and rocks, and the cartel hit back immediately. According to the Cambridge Journal of Latin American Studies, the Templars laid siege to La Ruana, Tepalcatepec, and Buenavista Tomatlán in the weeks following the uprising. Caravans of sicarios, which means hired gunmen, were sent from Templar strongholds in Apatzingán, Aguililla, Arteaga, and Tumbiscatillo. These were not random attacks. They were organized military operations. Convoys of pickup trucks loaded with armed men descended on the autodefensa-held towns and tried to take them back. 2 months after the uprising, on April 18, 2013, the Knights Templar launched a major retaliatory attack. According to researcher Michael Wolff, who conducted fieldwork in the region and interviewed autodefensa participants, this attack consisted of an estimated 200 to 300 assailants in pickup trucks armed with automatic rifles and grenade launchers. 200 to 300 men against farmers with shotguns. The attack failed. The autodefensas held their ground. But it made something very clear. This was no longer a protest. This was a war. The Intercept reported that during this period, the Templars set up blockades around the rebellious communities, triggering shortages of food, gasoline, and medicine. In La Ruana, the situation was desperate. A report from the Mexican outlet Global Mexico described how 8 out of 10 commercial businesses in La Ruana were closed. Gasoline had not entered the town in nearly 2 weeks because the cartel had threatened to burn the fuel trucks or kill the drivers. There was almost no food. People could not buy basic supplies. The town of 10,000 people was being strangled. According to the Global Mexico report, 10 lime farmers from La Ruana were killed while trying to transport their harvest to Apatzingan. The packing houses where they would normally sell their limes had been shut down or burned. Some of the packing house buildings still had enormous vehicles inside them, reduced to ashes. The Intercept described this period as a time when lime workers from La Ruana were ambushed on a protest march, with multiple people killed. But the siege did not break the movement. It made it grow. According to the Upside Down World news outlet, within fewer than 3 months of the February 24th uprising, the municipalities of Buenavista Tomatlan, Coalcoman, de Vázquez Pallares, and Apatzingan de la Constitución had also risen up in arms. The Warscapes investigative series reported that in 2013, the autodefensas went on to reclaim approximately 9 municipalities controlled by the Templars. The fighting was brutal. Michoacán became the second most violent state in Mexico that year, with 2,646 homicides recorded in 2013, according to Warscapes. The autodefensas grew because people were fed up. They grew because the alternative was to keep living on their knees, and they grew because of a factor that nobody had predicted. Mexicans living in the United States came home to fight. Michoacán has long been one of Mexico's biggest migrant-sending states. Hundreds of thousands of Michoacanos live and work in the United States, particularly in California. According to a HuffPost article that examined the connection between migrants and the autodefensas, the extortion regime imposed by the Knights Templar had been directly affecting the lives of migrants' families back in Michoacán. These workers were sending their paychecks home every month, and the cartel was taking a cut of every dollar that arrived. For people working construction and laying drywall in San Jose and Los Angeles, knowing that their money was going straight to the people who were terrorizing their families back home was unbearable. Some came back voluntarily, others had been deported and found their hometowns overrun by the cartel. The HuffPost article described how José Manuel Mireles, the movement's public face, had spent years in Sacramento, California. Another prominent leader, Estanislao Beltrán Torres, had strong ties to El Paso. A third leader, Luis Antonio Torres González, known as El Americano because he was born in the United States, also had deep connections to the U.S. At the ground level, young men who had grown up in California joined the checkpoints and patrols. One 20-year-old named Adolfo Silva, raised in Santa Ana, California, told reporters that fighting the Templars reminded him of gang turf battles back in California. The West Point Combating Terrorism Center published a detailed analysis confirming that groups of migrants in California and other states had organized in support of the vigilantes. The autodefensas were not just a local rebellion anymore. They had become a transnational movement, fueled by the fury and resources of a diaspora that refused to watch their homeland be destroyed from a distance. The weapons were a constant point of controversy. The autodefensas had started with shotguns and pistols, but as the conflict escalated, their arsenal grew. According to the Inside Crime investigation, militia members were seen carrying AK-47s, ARs-15, and even .50 caliber sniper rifles. Under Mexican law, these weapons could only be used with a permit issued by the military. They were also the kind of weapons more commonly associated with drug cartels than with farmers. The autodefensas said they had captured most of their weapons from defeated Templars and from corrupt police officers who had been working with the cartel. According to Inside Crime, Hipólito Mora said in a 2013 interview that the newly formed militia acquired the guns with money raised by supporters or captured them from the Knights Templar. But government officials and media outlets accused the autodefensas of receiving arms and support from a rival cartel, the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, known as CJNG. The Mexican Attorney General said in January 2014 that he had clear evidence that the CJNG was arming the militias. The autodefensas denied it. This question of who was really behind the movement would follow them for the rest of the war and beyond. Throughout the second half of 2013, the autodefensas developed their organization. When they moved into a new town, they followed a pattern. According to the European Review of Latin American and Caribbean Studies, armed men would set up checkpoints at the entrances and exits of the town. They would conduct identity checks to find Knights Templar members. They would gather intelligence. They would seal off the town from possible counterattacks. In most cases, the members personally knew each other or knew each other's families. These local connections gave them an advantage the cartel did not have. They knew who belonged and who did not. The autodefensas also set up local governing committees. According to the Warscapes investigative series, upon taking control of a town, the autodefensas would regularly establish a committee of 10 to 12 citizens to moderate disputes, recruit informants, staff the barricades, and purge the local police. They detained police officers accused of working with the cartel and confiscated their weapons. Though they detained local government officials accused of corruption. In several towns, the mayors fled or were run out. By December 2013, the autodefensas launched what the Cambridge study described as a liberation campaign. They moved beyond defending their own towns and began pushing outward, deliberately targeting Knights Templar-controlled municipalities. On December 29, 2013, they peacefully took over the municipality of Churumuco. According to Vice News, this was the calm before the storm. Then came January 2014. This is when the war reached its most intense phase. On January 4, 2014, the autodefensas moved on Paracuaro, a strategically important municipality just 15 kilometers from Apatzingan, the heart of Knights Templar territory. According to the Mexican newspaper Milenio, at least 300 armed civilians entered Paracuaro around 2:30 in the afternoon. They took the municipal palace, disarmed and detained 15 local police officers, and occupied the town center. Unlike Churumuco, the Templars fought back. Milenio reported shootings and vehicle burnings throughout the afternoon and into the night. According to Vice News, at least 2 cartel gunmen were killed during the battle for Paracuaro. 2 Mexican army soldiers also died in an ambush nearby. 1 autodefensa member was killed, though this death was not widely reported at the time. With Paracuaro, the autodefensas now had a presence in 10 of Michoacan's 113 municipalities. That same night, Saturday, January 4th, came the event that would change everything. Dr. José Manuel Mireles was traveling in a small single-engine aircraft from Guadalajara back to Tepalcatepec when the plane crashed near the town of La Huacana, about 90 miles from its intended destination. According to the Associated Press, the Michoacan State Prosecutor's Office said the crash was caused by a mechanical failure. 1 passenger was killed. Mireles survived but suffered a head injury and a dislocated jaw. He was flown by helicopter first to the state capital of Morelia, then to a hospital in Mexico City, where he was placed under federal police protection. Mireles always believed the crash was not an accident. He suspected it was an attempt on his life. The government said it was mechanical failure. Regardless of the cause, the result was devastating. The most visible leader of the autodefensa movement was hospitalized in Mexico City at the exact moment his forces were making their most aggressive push. But the war did not stop because the doctor was in a hospital bed. Over the next week, without Mireles, the autodefensas kept advancing. According to Time magazine's photojournalist Jerome Cecchini, who embedded with the autodefensas during this period, on January 5th, the vigilantes advanced on the town of Paracuaro and engaged in a 40-minute shootout with Knights Templar forces at the town entrance. A Templar gunman was shot dead. On January 11th, they moved toward the town of Antunes. The cartel tried to slow them down by setting trucks and buses on fire to create roadblocks on the highway. Smoke filled the air as the autodefensa convoy pushed through. On January 12, 2014, came the biggest battle yet. The autodefensas entered the town of Nueva Italia, a community of approximately 30,000 people. According to the NACLA report and Times coverage, a shootout between the autodefensas and the Knights Templar in downtown Nueva Italia lasted 3 to 4 hours. According to Time, Cecchini witnessed the autodefenses enter houses where cartel snipers had been shooting from. They detained municipal police officers and locked them in cells at the town hall, accusing them of working with the cartel. They entered the home of Enrique Plancarte Solis, one of the most wanted Knights Templar leaders. He was not there, but the symbolism was clear. The autodefensas were inside the homes of the cartel's top figures. Within days after Nueva Italia, the Mexican government could no longer pretend this was a minor local dispute. On January 13, 2014, Mexico's Interior Minister Miguel Ángel Osorio Chong announced that the federal government would take over responsibility for public security in Michoacán. According to the Latin Times, Chong blamed the crisis on the gradual destruction of the social fabric in the region and acknowledged that when the autodefensas first arose, state institutions had not properly responded to citizens' demands for protection from the cartel. The government pledged to send thousands of soldiers and federal police to the region. According to the Latin America Working Group, the Peña Nieto administration pledged nearly $3.4 billion in investment to support infrastructure and community development in Michoacán. A three-part plan was announced. First, the federal security forces would restore control over 27 municipalities. Second, there would be community and social development through federal aid. Third, the role of Michoacán's state institutions, which had largely collapsed under cartel influence, would be rebuilt. But the autodefensas were skeptical. They had heard promises before. The government had been in Michoacán since 2006 with Operation Michoacán, and the cartel had only gotten stronger. Hipólito Mora told reporters that the government was disarming the autodefensas, but not the Templars. Mireles, from his hospital bed, released a video saying he did not support any agreement to disarm unless the government first handed over the 7 main leaders of organized crime operating in the area. By this point, the numbers told the story of how far the movement had come. And according to researcher Michael Wolff, the autodefensas had eventually rallied some 20,000 armed fighters to their cause. They had defeated Knights Templar forces in a series of pitched battles throughout 2013 and early 2014. According to the Global Initiative Against Transnational Organized Crime, by the end of the campaign, the autodefensas had brought in more than 15,000 armed men across 34 municipalities in Michoacán. The Cambridge study confirmed that by early 2014, vigilante groups were present in over 40 municipalities. What had started with a lime farmer and a doctor in 2 small towns with hunting rifles had become the largest armed civilian mobilization in modern Mexican history. The farmers had taken on a cartel, and they had won the battles. But the war was about to change. But because the government was coming, and the government did not come to help. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Section 6. The government steps in, and everything changes. For nearly a year, the Mexican federal government had treated the autodefensas like a problem that would go away on its own. President Enrique Peña Nieto, who had taken office in December 2012, spent most of 2013 downplaying the crisis in Michoacán and ignoring the growing armed movement. According to the Inside Crime investigation, the government first condemned the militias as criminals, then all but ignored them through most of 2013, downplaying their advances and the state's insecurity. That changed in January 2014, when the autodefensas seized Paracuaro and then fought a 3 to 4 hour gun battle in the streets of Nueva Italia when they began surrounding Apatzingán, the very heart of Knights Templar territory. The government could no longer look away. According to Newsweek, in January 2014, President Peña Nieto sent 3,000 soldiers and federal police to the Tierra Caliente region. The federal government also announced that it was taking over responsibility for public security in the entire state of Michoacán, and then came the appointment that would change the course of the movement forever. Peña Nieto appointed Alfredo Castillo Cervantes as the Special Commissioner for the Security and Integral Development of Michoacán. According to the upside-down world news outlet, the Castillo was described as an obscure functionary who had never been involved in Michoacán issues. According to Newsweek, he was a longtime political associate of the president. According to Vice News, some analysts questioned whether the appointment was even legal. Political science professor Eduardo Nava Hernandez of the Universidad Michoacana de San Nicolás de Hidalgo pointed out that there was violence in many parts of the country, but only in Michoacán did Peña Nieto send a commissioner. Critics eventually took to calling Castillo the Viceroy, a reference to the colonial era when the Spanish monarch would send a personally chosen envoy to govern Mexico. Castillo's strategy became clear almost immediately. He did not come to fight the Knights Templar alongside the autodefensas. He came to bring the autodefensas under government control. According to the Justice in Mexico Research Project, on January 27, 2014, Interior Minister Miguel Ángel Osorio Chong announced that the federal government and the self-defense groups had agreed on a pact. Under this agreement, the autodefensas would be absorbed into the state security apparatus to form what was being called the Rural Defense Corps. The 8-point document specified that the Corps would be temporary. It required the group leaders to provide the government with a registry of all their members and to register their weapons. The document was signed by Castillo, Governor Fausto Vallejo, and several autodefensa leaders, including Estanislao Beltrán, Hipólito Mora, Jesus Butio, and Adalberto Rodriguez. One name was notably absent from the signing: Dr. José Manuel Mireles was not there. He was still recovering from the plane crash injuries he had sustained on January 4th. And even if he had been well enough to attend, it is not clear he would have signed. Because the government was offering a deal that sounded reasonable on the surface, but was deeply troubling underneath. Register your weapons, give us a list of your members, put on a uniform, follow our orders. In exchange, you become legal. But for people who had been abandoned by the government for years, who had watched their mayors take cartel money and their police officers work as cartel lookouts, the idea of handing control back to that same government felt like walking into a trap. And there was something else happening behind the scenes. While Mireles was in the hospital in Mexico City recovering from his injuries, a power shift was taking place within the autodefensa movement itself. According to Borderland Beat, in February 2014, while Mireles was still in the capital, Estanislao Beltrán Torres, known by his nickname Papa Pitufo, or Papa Smurf in English, unilaterally removed Mireles from his position as spokesman of the Autodefensa Council and appointed himself in Mireles' place. Beltrán pointed to Mireles having what he called mental issues resulting from the plane crash. According to Borderland Beat, this action was conducted without a formal vote, as required by the bylaws of the Autodefensa Federation. Co-founder Hipólito Mora stated at the time that he was not invited to any vote and knew of no meeting being held. The man the people knew as El Doctor, the face of the revolution, was being pushed aside while he lay in a hospital bed. While Beltrán was a different kind of leader. He was 55 years old, an agronomist, and had been one of the original Autodefensa founders in Tepalcatepec, alongside Mireles. He had a long white beard that earned him the Papa Smurf nickname. But where Mireles was defiant toward the government, Beltrán was willing to cooperate. Where Mireles demanded that the cartel leaders be captured before any disarmament took place, Beltrán was ready to accept the government's deal. According to Wikipedia's article on the Autodefensa groups, while Beltrán was charismatic, he did not have the same aptitude for leadership that Mireles had, and he began to lose control of the movement. Mireles surprised almost everyone when he returned to Michoacán in late February 2014, not fully healed and against his doctor's advice, to attend the first anniversary celebration of the Autodefensa movement on February 24, 2014. According to Borderland Beat, he came back to reassert his position and push back against Beltrán's takeover. The split between the two men was now public and bitter. On April 4, 2014, the Autodefensa groups and the federal government reached a formal agreement. According to the Justice in Mexico Research Project, the self-defense groups agreed to either disarm or officially join the Rural Defense Corps and register their weapons by May 10, 2014. In exchange, the government agreed to release nearly 100 self-defense group members who were being held under arrest. The deadline was set, May 10th. After that date, anyone found carrying unregistered weapons in Michoacán would be arrested. On May 10, 2014, the ceremony took place. According to Vice News, it was held in the town of Tepalcatepec, the very same place where the Autodefensas had emerged 15 months earlier. About 450 members of the Autodefensas who wished to continue their security duties received uniforms and weapons, so they could, as Beltran put it, continue the effort legally. According to the Digital Journal, which carried the AFP Wire report, Beltran slipped into his blue uniform and told reporters that with this, they had become legal and were now part of the government. 100 new rural police officers sang the national anthem at a formal swearing-in ceremony in the town square. Castillo stood alongside them. He told the new officers that from now on, they were in charge of defending their brothers, their families, and their neighbors. The ceremony was polished. So the uniforms were crisp, the assault rifles were new, but beneath the surface, everything was falling apart. Miralles was not at the ceremony. According to Vice News, just 2 days before the May 10th event, the Council of Self-Defense Forces in more than 30 towns had announced the dismissal of Miralles as chief spokesman. The council accused him of making public statements without authorization that undermined the movement. According to Vice News, Miralles accused Beltran and Commissioner Castillo of conspiring to expel him from the Autodefensas under the guise of him suffering from psychological problems. Miralles also accused Beltran and other leaders of having ties to members of criminal organizations. These were not small accusations. Miralles was saying publicly that the people who had taken over the movement he helped create were working with the very criminals the movement had been formed to fight, and there was evidence to support at least some of his concerns. According to Wikipedia, a third important Autodefensa leader, Nicolas Sierra Santana, known as El Gordo, had originally been a member of a subset of the Knights Templar cartel, but had joined the Autodefensas when he saw the Templars begin to lose power. After the government ordered the Autodefensas to disarm, Sierra Santana, along with many former Autodefensa members, went on to create a drug cartel called Los Viagras. According to the Mexico Solidarity media outlet, the Televisa television network revealed that Sierra Santana, one of the founders of Los Viagras, who had even received a credential from the rural force created by Castillo in 2014, despite his known ties to criminal groups. In other words, the government had given a badge and a uniform and a gun to a man who was building a new cartel. This was exactly what Miralles had warned about. The rural force was supposed to replace the Autodefensas with a professional, government-controlled police body. Instead, it was becoming a vehicle for former cartel members to rebrand themselves. The foxes were being hired to guard the henhouse. Meanwhile, the political establishment in Michoacán was collapsing under the weight of its own corruption. In early April 2014, according to socialist worker Uriel Chavez, the mayor of Apatzingán from the PRI party, was arrested on charges of extortion and misuse of public funds. Then, in mid-June 2014, the governor of Michoacán himself, Fausto Vallejo, resigned after leaked documents showed his political campaign had been financed by narco money. According to the same report, leaked photographs circulated on social media showing Vallejo's son, Rodrigo Vallejo, known by the nickname El Gerber, meeting with the leader of the Knights Templar cartel, Servando Gomez, also known as La Tuta. The governor's son meeting with the cartel boss. Photographs proving it. This was the government that was asking the autodefensas to trust them. This was the system that was promising to keep them safe if they would just put down their weapons. Mireles refused. He continued to organize. He traveled to Mexico City in late May 2014 and spoke at a series of forums organized by political figures critical of the government's inaction. And according to Socialist Worker, in his speeches, Mireles accused the federal government of pitting different forces against each other to divide the movement and of carrying out a media campaign to pretend that peace had returned to Michoacán. He was joined at these events by the outspoken Catholic priest and human rights advocate Alejandro Solalinde, who criticized the Mexican government and the social inequality that had plagued the country. By this point, the autodefensa movement was fractured into three broad camps. The first camp, led by Beltran and aligned with the government, had accepted the rural force deal. They wore the uniforms, they registered their weapons, they reported to the government's chain of command. The second camp, led by Mireles, refused to disarm and continued operating independently. See, they did not trust the government and did not believe the rural force would protect them. The third camp was the most dangerous. It consisted of individuals and groups who had joined the autodefensas, not out of genuine desire to fight the cartel, but to take advantage of the power vacuum. Some of these people were former cartel members. Some were building new criminal operations. They were using the autodefensa label as a shield while pursuing their own interests. According to the Associated Press report carried by the Santa Fe New Mexican, the federal government acknowledged that the new rural police force in Michoacán was being given uniforms and powerful weapons with minimal background checks and virtually no training. The force would be paid between 8,000 and 9,000 pesos per month, as roughly $620 to $700. Mexican historian Lorenzo Meyer told MVS Radio that replacing one armed group with another smacked of the government's long-held strategy of co-option. He said that in the rarefied soup that was Michoacán, there existed a very old practice of dividing, co-opting, and controlling, rather than actually resolving anything. Over 3,000 of an estimated 20,000 autodefensa members applied to join the rural force ahead of the registration deadline, according to Insight Crime. Many did not pass the exams or basic training. The force was supposed to start operating in Tepalcatepec and Buena Vista Tomatlan, then expand across the state. But the problems were immediate. According to Vice News, one of the original founders of the movement in Tepalcatepec, Sergio Rosales, told reporters after joining the rural force that the fight was worse than ever. He said they lacked organization and had never had formal training, that they had simply started resisting the Templars, and now it had become official. The man they called El Doctor had been sidelined. The movement he had built was being swallowed by the very system it had risen up against. And the government's new police force was filling up with the exact kind of people the autodefensas had been created to fight. The Archbishop of Morelia, Cardinal Alberto Suarez Inda, summed it up in an interview with Vice News before Castillo was eventually removed from his post. He said that the government sometimes thinks the repairs are easy. Take the photo, shake hands. Now everything is at peace. But what they were creating, he said, was an appearance of repair, or nothing more. The stage was now set for what came next. Mireles would not stop fighting. The government would not let him continue, and the collision between the doctor and the state was about to end in the worst possible way. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Section 7. Betrayal and Arrest. The government takes down the doctor. After the May 10, 2014 ceremony that turned the autodefensas into the rural force, Dr. Jose Manuel Mireles did not go quiet. He did the opposite. He got louder. He went on the radio and said the autodefensa movement was divided and infiltrated by criminals. He gave interviews accusing Commissioner Alfredo Castillo of conspiring with former cartel members. And he told anyone who would listen that the government's rural force was a sham, that it only covered 2 municipalities and that 34 others remained unprotected. He said that handing weapons to people with known ties to criminal organizations was not peace, it was a setup. According to Socialist Worker, Mireles sought to deepen support for the movement by connecting with activists and civil society organizations. In late May 2014, he spoke in Mexico City at a series of forums organized by political figures critical of the government's handling of the security crisis. He accused the federal government of carrying out a media campaign to pretend that peace had returned to Michoacán when it had not. He said the government was pitting different factions against each other to break the movement from within. And he was joined at these events by Catholic priest and human rights advocate Alejandro Solalinde. Mireles was not just criticizing the government in private conversations. He was doing it on television. He was doing it in newspapers. He was doing it to anyone with a microphone. And then he went further. According to the Justice in Mexico Research Project, reports from June 26, 2014, the day before Mireles was arrested, noted that a group of 300 armed Autodefensa members had arrived at La Mira, a small community just 15 kilometers from the port of Lázaro Cárdenas. Al Jazeera reported that Mireles entered La Mira with approximately 600 followers armed with automatic rifles. He claimed the locals had called him for protection against criminal gangs. For Mireles told reporters that his plan was to retake La Mira and then push toward Lázaro Cárdenas and eventually all the way to Morelia, the state capital. La Mira was a strategic location. According to Vice News, Mireles' lawyer Talia Vázquez Alatorre described it as an obligatory stop between the mountains and the port of Lázaro Cárdenas. Drugs, guns, and minerals passed through there. It was a position that belonged to La Tuta, the head of the Knights Templar. Taking La Mira would have been a direct blow to the cartel's most important supply routes. Commissioner Castillo had already warned that not one self-defense group would enter the capital city of Morelia. He had said publicly that anyone who remained armed and had not joined the rural force after the May 10th deadline would be arrested. Mireles had crossed that line. He was openly armed, openly defiant, and openly marching toward a city that the government considered off-limits. On Friday, June 27, 2014, at approximately 5:30 in the evening, the operation came down. According to Vice News, Dr. José Manuel Mireles was arrested during a heavy federal and military operation in La Mira. The operation involved all the major Mexican security forces, the Army, the Navy, the federal police, and state-level police and prosecutors. According to the Chiapas Support Committee, which published a translated La Jornada editorial, around 30 federal trucks arrived at the location. According to Insight Crime, he was detained along with 69 other vigilantes. According to other reports, including from Al Jazeera and Telesur, the total number of those arrested was 82 or 83, depending on the source. Wikipedia cites 45 people arrested along with Mireles. The exact number of people arrested varies across sources. What does not vary is this: Mireles was taken down. According to Vice News, Commissioner Castillo said during a press conference that Mireles and 3 bodyguards were found with 14 firearms, as well as ammunition, marijuana, cocaine, and 30,000 pesos in cash, approximately $2,300. Mireles was charged with violating Mexico's federal law of firearms and explosives and with drug-related offenses. Mireles denied the drug charges. According to Socialist Worker, though no drugs were found at the time of Mireles' actual arrest, subsequent police reports already accused him of drug possession. The article described the charges as fabricated. But according to High Times, which covered the protest campaign for Mireles' release, his legal team said the evidence against him was fabricated and that he was tortured while in detention. The timing of the arrest was suspicious to many observers. Mireles was organizing a new Autodefensa group in La Mira, which was a strategic location for the Knights Templar. His lawyer Vázquez called the coincidence suspicious. According to Telesur, when Mireles was arrested, he said that he had fallen into a trap. He said he had been told that a spokesperson in the armed forces wanted to speak with him, but instead he was arrested. He added that he did not wish to become a martyr. Within days of his arrest, Mireles was transferred far from Michoacán. According to the Justice in Mexico Research Project, he was sent to the Federal Center for Social Rehabilitation No. 11, a maximum security prison in Hermosillo, in the state of Sonora. This was hundreds of miles from his home, from his supporters, from his lawyers, and from anyone who might help him. And then the humiliation began. According to Borderland Beat, citing multiple sources, upon arrival at the prison, Miral's famous white hair and signature bushy mustache were shaved clean. The man who had been recognized across Mexico, whose face had appeared on magazine covers and television screens, was stripped of the physical features that made him instantly identifiable. According to Socialist Worker, in solidarity with Mireles, his lawyer, Talia Vasquez, shaved her own head. Public shavings took place across Mexico as supporters copied the gesture. Mireles became prisoner number 5,557. According to the Chiapas Support Committee, which published an interview conducted by La Jornada journalist Sanjuana Martinez, Mireles laughed when he heard people were shaving their heads in solidarity. He cried when told about the support he was receiving. And then, with firmness, he said what he believed to be true. He said he was a political prisoner. His lawyer agreed. According to the Chiapas Support Committee, Vasquez argued that officials like Commissioner Castillo and Interior Secretary Osorio Chong had publicly declared that Mireles was a prisoner for not having complied with the May Accords. She said this proved his detention was political, not criminal. She pointed out that other Autodefensa members charged with identical violations had been pardoned and released. Mireles was being treated differently because he was the one leader who had challenged the government most directly. Vasquez also argued that it was the government, not Mireles, that had broken the original pact. She said Castillo had not released the more than 500 imprisoned Autodefensa members across Michoacán. He had not freed Hipólito Mora before the May 10th deadline, and above all, he had not captured La Tuta, the leader of the Knights Templar, which had been the central condition of any agreement. According to Vasquez, the one who broke the pact was Alfredo Castillo, not Dr. Mireles. In prison, Mireles' health deteriorated rapidly. According to Borderland Beat, he was a diabetic who required insulin injections 3 times a day. He was denied proper food for his condition. He was denied proper medical care. But according to a Borderland Beat article from May 2015, his health had deteriorated to the point that his sister Virginia, known as Vicky, said he might soon require amputation. He had fallen and sustained a spinal injury. He was using a wheelchair. 2 doctors and a delegation from a local human rights commission had been denied access to him. Only his attorney was allowed to visit, and even that access was limited. From prison, Mireles sent messages to the outside world through his lawyer and through the Grillonautas YouTube channel. According to Wikipedia, in a message released in 2015, he stated that not only was Manuel Mireles innocent, but so were all self-defense members who had to carry a weapon to defend their home, their family, and their property, because there was no one to help them. Meanwhile, outside the prison walls, the situation in Michoacán continued to unravel. The rural force, the government's replacement for the Autodefensas, was proving to be exactly what Mireles had predicted. According to Mexico News Daily, photographs surfaced on Facebook showing a Mercedes-Benz bearing the logo of the rural force in the town of Apatzingan. The government force that was supposed to fight the cartel was cruising around in luxury vehicles. According to Mexico News Daily, the rural force commander Beltran reportedly appeared in a video alongside the leader of Los Viagras, the new criminal group that had emerged from within the Autodefensa movement. Accusations flew that the Knights Templar bosses were now wearing uniforms and badges. According to the Upside Down World news outlet, the rural force had quickly revealed itself to be, in their words, a perfect shelter for former Templars intending to continue committing crimes and abuses, only this time with uniforms and permission to carry guns. In mid-December 2014, a large number of what the outlet called legitimate self-defense groups rose up again. They set up more than 30 highway blockades across Michoacán. They demanded the release of the more than 400 Autodefensa members still in prison, the removal of Commissioner Castillo, and the dissolution of the rural force. The protests worked, at least partially. According to Upside Down World, the federal government eventually satisfied 2 of the 3 demands. On January 23, 2015, Commissioner Castillo was removed from his post. According to Vice News, Interior Minister Osorio Chong announced the move, saying circumstances had changed and the state was safer. But critics did not agree. According to Vice News, Castillo left without fully resolving Michoacán's complex security problems. The Knights Templar had been weakened, but not dismantled. La Tuta remained at large. Gun battles between rival factions of the former Autodefensas had claimed dozens of lives. Vice News reported that Castillo lasted a year and 8 days in his post. His strategy, especially in demobilizing the vigilante groups and putting them under government control, was often unclear. The Archbishop of Morelia, Cardinal Alberto Suarez Inda, had already described the result as an appearance of repair. According to Wikipedia, Castillo was removed after rumors that a cartel had bribed him to allow cartel members to join the rural force and to spy on former Autodefensa members who were now part of the rural police. He was reassigned to a position in sports administration. He was not investigated further. According to Upside Down World, Castillo's replacement was General Felipe Gurola Ramirez, a soldier trained by the United States Army Rangers at Fort Benning, the old school of the Americas. When the people of Michoacán had asked for the removal of Castillo, they were not imagining that his replacement would be a military general trained at an institution famous across Latin America for producing soldiers associated with human rights abuses. Mireles stayed in prison. He stayed in his wheelchair. He stayed in his cell in Hermosillo, hundreds of miles from the Tierra Caliente, while the movement he had built was consumed by the very forces it had been created to fight. According to Borderland Beat, as of mid-2015, there were approximately 500 Autodefensa members imprisoned across Michoacán. Popular and respected leaders had been locked up or killed. The government had been meticulous in shutting down what the outlet called the genuine Autodefensa movement. In 2016, from prison, Mireles did something that surprised many of his supporters. According to Wikipedia, he issued an apology to the government and his family. In a video statement posted on social media, he said that he wanted to apologize to the Mexican government and its official and unofficial institutions for disrespecting them with words or actions, and for offending them with his omissions and civil disobedience. Some supporters saw it as a sign that the government had broken him. Others believed it was a strategic move to secure his release. And the charges against him were eventually dropped by the Attorney General. But even after the charges were dropped, Mireles remained in jail. It was not until May 11, 2017, nearly 3 years after his arrest, that a federal judge granted Mireles parole. According to Wikipedia, he paid a bond of 30,000 pesos and agreed not to leave the state of Michoacán or the country. He was formally acquitted in 2018. Nearly 3 years, the man who had led the largest armed civilian uprising in modern Mexican history, who had organized the liberation of dozens of municipalities from cartel control, who had become the international face of a movement that proved ordinary people could fight back against organized crime, had spent nearly 3 years in a maximum security prison, denied proper medical care, denied regular visits, his hair shaved, his health broken. He walked out of prison in a wheelchair. The Knights Templar Cartel, the organization he had risen up to destroy, was still being dismantled while he sat behind bars. Its leaders were being captured and killed, one by one. But Mireless was not there to see it happen. He was not there to claim any victory. He was locked in a cell in Sonora, 800 kilometers from home, because the government he had begged for help had decided that the doctor who fought the cartel was more dangerous than the cartel itself. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Section 8. The Fall of the Knights Templar. One by one, the cartel loses its leaders, while the Autodefensa movement was tearing itself apart, while Dr. Guy Mirelles was sitting in a maximum security prison in Sonora, and while Hipólito Mora was fighting accusations and enemies on all sides, the Knights Templar cartel was dying. Not all at once, one leader at a time. The cartel that had terrorized Michoacan for years, that had controlled entire municipalities, that had extorted every farmer and miner and shopkeeper in the Tierra Caliente, was being dismantled. Its leadership was being removed from the map. And the removal started before most people realized it was happening. The first to fall was Dionisio Loya Plancarte. His nickname was El Tío, which means the uncle. He got that name because he was believed to be the uncle of Enrique Plancarte Solis, another top Knights Templar leader. According to multiple reports, De Loya Plancarte was one of the original co-founders of the Knights Templar when the cartel split from La Familia Michoacana. According to the Latin Times, he was one of the 7 leaders of the organization and was in charge of distributing drugs in the main plaza of Morelia. According to Al Jazeera, he was suspected of being the cartel's go-between with corrupt security and justice officials. According to IB Times UK, Loya Plancarte was 58 years old at the time of his arrest and was one of the 5 most important criminal leaders in Michoacan. On Monday, January 27, 2014, soldiers and federal police found him in Morelia, the state capital of Michoacan. According to Al Jazeera America, the National Public Safety System Secretary Monte Rubido said that the feared drug lord was arrested without a shot being fired. He was found hiding in a closet. According to the Latin Times, he was accompanied only by a young boy who was turned over to the public ministry. The Mexican government had offered a reward of 30 million pesos, roughly $2.25 million, for information leading to his arrest. According to Borderland Beat, Loya Plancarte was considered the second in command of the cartel and was accused, along with Servando Gomez Martinez, also known as La Tuta, for the execution of 12 officers of the federal police in July 2009. He had been thought dead until May 2013, when he reappeared in a video challenging Autodefensa leader Hipólito Mora to a death match. According to NBC News, his detention marked the first major capture of someone from the inner circle of the Knights Templar. A local journalist from Michoacan, reported by Al Jazeera America, recalled watching Loya Plancarte lead a sort of pilgrimage to a shrine built for Nazario Moreno, the cartel's supposed spiritual leader. Loya Plancarte had his assistants hand out 500 peso bills to people who attended. That was the first domino. The second fell less than 6 weeks later. On March 9, 2014, less than 2 months after El Tío was pulled out of a closet, the Mexican government confirmed that Nazario Moreno Gonzalez had been killed. This was the same Nazario Moreno who the government had already said was dead. Back in December 2010, the government of President Felipe Calderón declared that Moreno had been killed in a 2-day gunfight with federal police, but no body was ever recovered. For 4 years, rumors spread that he was alive and still running the cartel from the shadows. And according to Wikipedia and multiple verified sources, the Autodefensas knew he was alive. In an interview with Noticias MVS in February 2014, Mirelles stated that Moreno had celebrated Christmas Day 2013 with fellow cartel leader Enrique Plancarte Solis and his daughter, the banda singer Melissa, at his house. Mireles also claimed in March 2014 that the self-defense groups had nearly captured Moreno at a ranch close to Tumbiscatillo, but that he had managed to escape 20 minutes before their arrival. According to Inside Crime, there had been rumors ever since the 2010 supposed death that El Chayo was still alive and running drug operations. The government of President Peña Nieto received reports, both from the autodefensa groups and from anonymous tips, confirming that Moreno was not only alive, but was still running the cartel. When the end came at approximately 7 in the morning on March 9, 2014. According to Wikipedia and confirmed by the Justice in Mexico Research Project, the Mexican Army and Navy pinpointed Moreno's location in Tumbiscatillo, Michoacán. When they attempted to arrest him, the drug lord opened fire on the security forces. He was killed in the exchange. According to Wikipedia, Mexico's Attorney General's office officially confirmed his identity through DNA examinations and fingerprint identification. Post-mortem reports showed that Moreno died of 2 gunshot wounds to the chest. According to the Justice in Mexico Project, the operation was coordinated between the Army, Navy, Mexico's Center for Investigation and National Security, and the Secretary of National Defense. Authorities also used anonymous tips and constant reports from locals. While investigators conducted the autopsy at a hospital in Apatzingán, more than 150 law enforcement officers cordoned the area to prevent cartel members from attempting to steal his body. According to Wikipedia, on March 12, 2014, the corpse was transferred to Morelia under tight security for further testing. According to the CBC, the man who was known as El Más Loco, the craziest one, would have turned 44 years old the day before he was killed. A few days after the shootout, according to Wikipedia and a CBC, people carried out a peace march in Apatzingán expressing their support for the cartel. They held banners that read things along the lines of Nazario living forever in their hearts. These were people who still believed the cartel had protected them, or at least feared saying otherwise. And the third leader to fall was Enrique Plancarte Solis, known as Quique. He was the man in charge of the cartel's methamphetamine production and smuggling operations into the United States. According to Wikipedia, the U.S. Department of the Treasury had sanctioned him in February 2010 under the Foreign Narcotics Kingpin Designation Act. According to the Latin Times, the Mexican government had offered a reward of 30 million pesos, roughly $2.3 million, for information leading to his capture. According to Justice in Mexico, the Mexican Navy killed Plancarte in a shootout on March 31, 2014, in the municipality of Colón, Querétaro. This was not Michoacán. This was a different state entirely, hundreds of kilometers away. Plancarte had been running. According to the Justice in Mexico Project, the joint operation with the Army involved nearly 200 military troops and 2 helicopters and took more than 24 hours. According to Borderland Beat, the operation developed over the course of a full day in Colón, where federal forces searched dozens of residences and came up empty-handed. He was finally tracked down near a public soccer field. According to the Latin Times, the infantry of the Navy tried to arrest him, and he resisted. A confrontation broke out, and he was killed. According to UPI, Plancarte's death came after the arrest of one of his alleged operators, identified only as Samuel, who had offered authorities $1 million for his immediate release. That arrested man's information led authorities to Plancarte's location in Querétaro. According to the Latin Times, his death came less than a month after that of Nazario Moreno. A third cartel head, Servando Gomez, La Tuta, remained on the run. Meanwhile, Hipólito Mora, the lime farmer who had started the uprising in La Ruana, was fighting a different kind of battle. In March 2014, Mora was arrested on murder charges. According to Vice News, he was accused of involvement in the deaths of Autodefensa leader Rafael Sánchez Moreno, known as El Pollo, and his bodyguard José Luis Torres Castañeda. Their burned bodies had been found in the back of a pickup truck in Buena Vista on March 8th. According to the San Diego Union Tribune, El Pollo was an enforcer connected to the Knights Templar who had infiltrated the militia movement. The accusations came from the camp of Luis Antonio Torres Gonzalez, a rival autodefensa leader known as El Americano because he had grown up in the United States. According to Inside Crime, both leaders accused each other of having ties to drug cartels. The dispute between Mora and Torres had been simmering since the early days of the autodefensa movement. According to Inside Crime, Mireles said in a radio interview that the conflict between Mora and Torres had roots in a family dispute. Mireles claimed that a niece of Mora had become romantically involved with El Americano, which angered Mora. In retaliation, the leader of the La Ruana militia had exiled Torres's mother from the town. Mora was imprisoned in March 2014 and held in a medium-security prison in Charo, near Morelia. According to the Proceso news outlet, he spent approximately 2 months in prison before being released in April for lack of evidence. Commissioner Castillo then staged a reconciliation, publishing a photograph on Twitter showing himself holding the hands of both Mora and Torres. But the peace was not real. On December 16, 2014, the violence exploded again. A shootout erupted in La Ruana between Mora's faction and Torres's faction. According to Vice News, the clash resulted in 11 deaths. Among the dead were 6 of Mora's followers, including his oldest son, Manuel. 5 members of Torres's group also died. According to the Peninsula Qatar, Mora and 26 others were transferred to a prison in Morelia. He had surrendered voluntarily with 26 of his men to submit to an investigation. According to El Universal, a federal judge ordered formal imprisonment for Torres, El Americano, and 9 of his men for the deaths of 8 of the 11 people killed. The judge found that Torres's group had positive results in forensic tests, confirming they had recently fired weapons. Mora's group was accused of responsibility for 10 of the 11 deaths. Both men went to prison. The movement that had started in La Ruana, in the town square where Mora had rallied farmers with hunting rifles, had come full circle. The founders were now killing each other. And then, on February 27, 2015, the last domino fell. According to Wikipedia, at 3 in the morning, Servando Gomez Martinez, the man known as La Tuta, was captured. He was apprehended by an elite squadron of the Mexican Federal Police in Morelia, Michoacán. No shots were fired. La Tuta had been the last top leader of the Knights Templar still free. He was the most public of all of them. He was a former elementary school teacher from the hill town of Arteaga, Michoacán. According to CBS News, he was still listed on a school payroll as recently as 2009. His other nickname was El Profe, the Professor. According to Vice News, La Tuta had been living in a cave near Morelia. The break in the case came in part because his girlfriend ordered a chocolate cake for his birthday on February 6th, which drew the attention of surveillance teams that had been watching his known associates. According to the Justice in Mexico Research Project, the investigation leading to the arrest had begun in mid-2014, when authorities identified several people acting as intermediaries between Gomez and his family members. In September 2014, the investigators identified an individual within his inner circle, a messenger who communicated orders from Gomez to his area chiefs. On February 2nd, investigators watched this man and several others enter a house in Morelia, where La Tuta was believed to be celebrating his birthday. The same group was identified at the same house on February 27th, and special forces were notified. La Tuta was detained as he left the house. According to NBC News, after months of intelligence work, federal police captured Gomez and several associates early in the morning without a single shot fired. According to the Associated Press, as reported by the Police One news outlet, he was trying to sneak out of the house wearing a baseball cap and a scarf to hide his identity. He was arrested along with 8 bodyguards and associates carrying a grenade launcher, 3 grenades, a machine pistol, and assault rifles. Latuta's girlfriend, 27-year-old Maria Antonieta Luna Avalos, was also arrested. According to the Justice in Mexico Project, that same day, a separate operation in Mérida, in the state of Yucatan, captured his brother Flavio Gomez Martinez, the alleged financial chief of the Knights Templar. According to NBC News, Gomez was frog-marched in front of media cameras that evening, his head shoved down by masked federal police officers who grabbed the scruff of his neck and led him to a helicopter to be flown to prison. During his time as a fugitive, Latuta had not been quiet. According to NPR, he frequently called into television and radio shows and posted videos to YouTube. He also handed out cash in local villages. According to CBS News, e-recordings showed him meeting with elected officials, journalists, and other influential people. Among those recordings, according to multiple Mexican outlets, including Telemundo, was a video released in July 2014 showing Latuta in a meeting with Rodrigo Vallejo Mora, the son of former Governor Fausto Vallejo. The governor's son was discussing coordination between his father's administration officials and the cartel. According to CBC, the former governor's interior secretary, Jesus Reina, and other officials were jailed for alleged connections to the Knights Templar. Interior Minister Miguel Ángel Osorio Chong called Latuta's capture the most important objective in the battle against organized crime and the detention of the most sought-after criminal in Mexico. While President Peña Nieto called him one of the most sought-after delinquents in Mexico. According to Inside Crime, Latuta's capture effectively ended the Knights Templar as a powerful criminal organization. But according to the Justice in Mexico Project's David Shirk, it would be a mistake to conclude that the organization was fully dismantled. Its roots went back to the 1980s and 1990s, and according to security analysts, the more likely result would be an atomization of the cartel, with splinter groups and rival organizations, particularly the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, rushing to fill the void. Every single one of the top Knights Templar leaders was now either dead or in prison. Nazario Moreno, dead. Enrique Plancarte Solís, dead. Dionisio Loya Plancarte, in prison. Servando Gómez Martínez, Latuta, in prison. The cartel that had ruled Michoacán with terror and extortion and religious rituals and pseudo-morality codes had been decapitated. The autodefenses had helped make it happen. The pressure they put on the cartel pushed the leaders into the open, forced them to run, and made it easier for the government to track them down. Without the uprising of February 24, 2013, it is difficult to imagine any of this happening. But the men who started the uprising were not there to see the end. Mireles was in a wheelchair in a cell in Sonora. Mora had buried his son, and the towns of Tierra Caliente were not at peace. They were just under new management. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Section 9. What became of them? On May 11, 2017, and after nearly 3 years in prison, Dr. José Manuel Mireles walked out of El Rincón prison in Tepic, Nayarit. According to Borderland Beat, he was released at 7 in the morning. A federal judge had granted him parole after his lawyers paid a bond of 30,000 pesos, roughly $1,600. The bond was paid thanks to members of the Movimiento Ciudadano political party. He was required to check in periodically with the court, not leave the state of Michoacán, and not leave the country. According to Borderland Beat, in a telephone interview with journalist Ciro Gomez Leiva on the day of his release, Mireles said that when he entered prison, he did not have the diseases he had now. He said he had suffered 2 heart attacks while incarcerated. He still had diabetes and spinal problems. He said he gained all of that inside. He did not have any of it before. Within 2 weeks of his release, according to Borderland Beat, Mireles was hospitalized urgently on May 26, 2017. His cardiologist reported sustained sinus tachycardia, accompanied by difficulty breathing and chest pain. At the request of his family and facilitated by an order from the governor of Michoacán, Silvano Aureoles, Mireles was transferred by air from Morelia to the National Institute of Cardiology in Mexico City. His condition was described as stable but delicate. According to Mexico News Daily, a federal court dismissed the case against Mireles in 2018. The ruling was definitive. His freedom was absolute. The court found that under the new criminal justice system, the crime he had been charged with was not classified as serious. See, a separate ruling in November 2017 had already found him not guilty of inciting violence. The legal battle that had consumed nearly 4 years of his life was over. After his release, Mireles entered politics. According to Borderland Beat, the political party Morena, the party of Andrés Manuel López Obrador, offered Mireles a candidacy. According to El Financiero, Mireles headed the list of candidates for local deputies through proportional representation for Morena in Michoacán for the 2018 elections. However, according to El Financiero, the Michoacán State Electoral Tribunal later removed him from the list because his candidacy had violated the political rights of another candidate, Francisco Cedillo de Jesus, who had been improperly displaced by Morena's national leadership. Mireles lost his candidacy 32 days before the election. According to Wikipedia, Mireles was featured in the 2015 American documentary film Cartel Land, directed by Matthew Heineman. The film followed the autodefensa movement and was nominated for an Academy Award for Best Documentary Feature. On November 25, 2020, Dr. José Manuel Mireles Valverde died. He was 62 years old. According to the Washington Times, reporting from the Associated Press, the Federal Institute for Social Security and Services for State Workers, the government health agency where Mireles worked as a physician, confirmed his death. According to Wikipedia, those operating Mireles' personal Twitter account said he died from the effects of COVID-19. The doctor who had led the largest armed civilian uprising in modern Mexican history, who had organized thousands of ordinary people to fight a cartel that the government would not fight, who had survived a plane crash, nearly 3 years in a maximum security prison, 2 heart attacks, and a broken spine, was taken by a virus. Hipólito Mora outlived Mireles by nearly 3 years, but his story did not end peacefully either. After his release from prison following the December 2014 shootout with El Americanos faction, Mora attempted to enter politics. According to Wikipedia, in March 2015, Mora was announced by the Movimiento Ciudadano Party as a candidate for federal deputy for the 12th District of Michoacán, based in Apatzingán. According to Wikipedia, Mora was also the gubernatorial nominee for the Solidarity and Counterparty in the 2021 Michoacán state elections. But Mora never stopped talking about what was happening in Michoacán. In 2022, according to the Associated Press, Mora told reporters that the situation in Michoacán had become worse than it was in 2013, when they first took up arms. He was one of the few original fighters who still lived in La Ruana after the Knights Templar had been driven out. He tended to his lime groves. He lived with armed bodyguards provided by the state. He survived at least 2 previous attempts on his life. According to Vice News, the most recent one before his death happened in March 2023, when hitmen approached him at a workshop near his house and opened fire. His bodyguards fired back, and he survived with injuries that were not life-threatening. After that attempt, Michoacán state authorities asked him to permanently leave his home and relocate to Morelia, and he had been living there until the day he was killed. According to Vice News, in a video posted to Facebook a week before his murder, Mora said that he and other residents of La Ruana were still being extorted. He asked the authorities to come and do their work. On Thursday, June 29, 2023, Hipólito Mora Chávez was ambushed and killed. He was 67 years old. According to the Associated Press, as reported by multiple outlets, including The Hill, Mexico News Daily, and the San Diego Union Tribune, Mora was driving an armored pickup truck in La Ruana, followed by 2 state police officers assigned to his security, when a group of at least 5 pickup trucks blocked his path and opened fire. According to the Michoacán State Prosecutor's Office, unidentified gunmen cut off Mora's vehicle and his bodyguard's pickup, or riddled the vehicles with bullets, and then set Mora's truck on fire. According to the San Diego Union Tribune, residents shared video of the attack suggesting the gunmen used a machine gun and a sniper rifle. 3 bodyguards were also killed. According to Vice News, Mora's brother Guadalupe posted a video on social media outside the place where Hipólito was killed and accused the Mexican government of abandoning him. He said they had left him alone without protection. Michoacán Governor Alfredo Ramírez Bedolla said his government profoundly regretted the cowardly murder. Former President Felipe Calderón condemned the killing and acknowledged Mora's repeated acts of bravery. According to The Guardian, Guillermo Valencia, a politician from Michoacán, said that Mora was a man who deserved to be in the history books and not killed the way he was. According to The Guardian, security expert Oscar Balderas said Mora was an extraordinary and brave man who had plotted a course for the self-defense movement. He said Mora knew he would not die of old age. He knew his enemies would kill him. He knew it, and he lived with that knowledge. Balderas said Mora never got to see his dream of a pacified Michoacán. According to the Associated Press, Mora was buried on Saturday, July 1st, 2023, in La Ruana alongside 2 of his bodyguards. Hundreds of residents turned out for the funeral. At the local cemetery, they were laid to rest to the sound of a corrido ballad. A photograph displayed at Mora's wake carried a quote attributed to him. It read, "We rose up because we had nothing to lose. Both founders of the autodefensa movement were now gone." Mireles died at 62 from COVID-19. Mora was murdered at 67 in the same town where he had first picked up a gun to defend his neighbors. The Knights Templar cartel they had fought was destroyed, but new cartels had moved in. According to Wikipedia, the Jalisco New Generation Cartel and a group called Los Viagras, which had emerged from within the autodefensa movement itself, now fought for control of the Tierra Caliente. The extortion continued. The violence continued. The 2 men who had proven that ordinary people could stand up and fight back against organized crime both paid for it with everything they had. One lost his freedom, his health, and eventually his life to a pandemic. The other lost his son, his safety, and eventually his life to the same kind of violence he had spent a decade trying to stop. And neither one of them got to see the peace they fought for. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Section 10. The Legacy: What the Autodefensas Left Behind. In 2015, a documentary film called Cartel Land was released. It was directed by an American filmmaker named Matthew Heineman. According to Wikipedia, the film followed 2 vigilante groups on different sides of the United States-Mexico border. On the Mexican side, it followed Dr. José Manuel Mireles and the Autodefensas in Michoacán. On the American side, it followed Tim Foley, the leader of a small paramilitary group called Arizona Border Recon. According to the film's official description, executive produced by Catherine Bigelow, the director of The Hurt Locker and Zero Dark 30, and the documentary embedded Heineman directly in the action. He was there during shootouts on the streets of Michoacán. He was there when autodefensas captured cartel members and the Mexican army rolled in trying to disarm the vigilantes instead of the criminals. He was there when the townspeople of Apatzingán surrounded the soldiers and shouted them out of town. According to the International Documentary Association, Heineman began shooting in June 2013, just months after the uprising began. He described his purpose simply. He wanted to know what happens when government institutions fail and citizens feel like they have to take the law into their own hands. The film premiered at the 2015 Sundance Film Festival. According to Wikipedia, Heineman won the Best Director Award and the Special Jury Award for Cinematography. The film was nominated for the Academy Award for Best Documentary Feature at the 88th Academy Awards in 2016. It was also nominated for Best Documentary at the 69th British Academy Film Awards. It won 3 Primetime Emmy Awards, including Exceptional Merit in Documentary Filmmaking and Best Cinematography. According to Rotten Tomatoes, the film received a 90% approval rating from critics. According to the International Documentary Association, Heinemann was presented with the Courage Under Fire Award, given in recognition of conspicuous bravery in the pursuit of truth. He was also named one of Foreign Policy magazine's 100 Leading Global Thinkers of 2015. Cartel Land brought the story of the Michoacán autodefensas to the world. It showed audiences in the United States and Europe what had been happening in the Tierra Caliente. It showed that ordinary farmers and ranchers had taken up arms and driven out a cartel that the government either could not or would not stop. And it showed what happened next, how the movement fractured, how leaders were co-opted or arrested, how the lines between the vigilantes and the criminals became impossible to tell apart. That blurring of lines became the defining legacy of the autodefensa movement. According to Mexico News Daily, Los Viagras, the criminal group that emerged directly from within the autodefensa movement, was founded by Nicolas Sierra Santana, known as El Gordo, a former Knights Templar member who had joined the autodefensas and received a rural force credential from Commissioner Castillo, despite his known criminal ties. What started as a self-defense group became a cartel in its own right. According to the F.I.U. Gordon Institute for Public Policy, the autodefensa groups that were created to fight extortion and cartel violence were gradually corrupted through their involvement in organized crime. The largest of the groups that emerged from this process was a loose alliance called Cartels Unidos. According to the same FIU report, Michoacán has been the site of some of the most intense armed combat between criminal groups in Mexico, including the use of surveillance drones, armed attack drones, landmines, improvised explosive devices, and armored vehicles. The port of Lázaro Cárdenas, by the same port that La Tuta and the Knights Templar once controlled, remains a key item of value for the cartels. The Jalisco New Generation Cartel, known as CJNG, is now considered by both Mexican and United States authorities to be the most powerful criminal organization in the country. According to Mexico News Daily, by 2019, the CJNG and Los Viagras were fighting for control of the crystal methamphetamine trade throughout the state. According to the Securo Group, a security analysis firm, today, Michoacán is contested primarily by 2 main actors, Los Viagras and the CJNG. Smaller groups, including remnants of La Familia Michoacana and the Knights Templar, also remain active. The port of Lázaro Cárdenas is allegedly controlled by the CJNG and serves as one of the main smuggling routes for synthetic drugs and precursor chemicals from China. According to Securo Group, smaller criminal groups that cannot compete in the drug trade have been forced into other activities like kidnapping, extortion, prostitution, and gambling, creating forced displacement in rural communities. According to the same report, the multi-billion-dollar avocado industry, headquartered in Michoacán, has become a primary target for extortion. Los Viagras charges an average of $250 per hectare as a protection tax for avocado growers near Uruapan. Local avocado producers have organized their own civilian police units to protect their farms, echoing the same pattern that gave birth to the autodefensas a decade earlier. So in 2022, according to the Associated Press, Hipólito Mora told reporters that the situation in Michoacán had become worse than it was in 2013 when they first took up arms. He said this 1 year before he was killed. According to the Revista Común Academic Journal, Michoacán has passed through at least 4 phases since the autodefensas emerged. The first was the rise of the self-defense groups. The second was the government intervention and absorption of the movement into the rural force. The third was the emergence of new criminal groups from within the movement itself. The fourth is an era of fragmented violence between the CJNG, Los Viagras, Carteles Unidos, and remnants of older organizations with no single group able to establish full control and no peace in sight. The journal noted that the Tierra Caliente has been the birthplace of every major criminal organization in Michoacán's recent history, from the Valencia Cartel to the Milenio Cartel to La Familia Michoacana to the Knights Templar to Los Viagras. The CJNG also originated in the region. Its leader, Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes, known as El Mencho, is from Aguililla, one of the first municipalities where the autodefensas rose up. According to the Justice in Mexico Research Project reporting on Mora's murder, an intelligence report revealed that Los Viagras, which formed part of Mexico's government-backed vigilante force, was actually a criminal enterprise operating under the cover of the self-defense movement. The Justice in Mexico report noted that Mora's unidentified killer was believed to be affiliated with Los Viagras. Orzap, the story of the Michoacán autodefensas is not a simple story. It is not a story where there are only good guys and bad guys. It is a story about what happens when a government abandons its people to criminal violence for so long that the people decide to fight back on their own. And then what happens when the government steps back in, not to help, but to control. And then what happens when the fighters themselves become the thing they were fighting against. Dr. José Manuel Mireles died on November 25, 2020, at age 62, from COVID-19. Hipólito Mora Chávez was gunned down on June 29, 2023, at age 67, in the same town where he started the uprising. The Knights Templar cartel was destroyed. Every one of its top leaders was killed or imprisoned. But the violence in Michoacán did not end. It changed shape. It found new names, or it kept going. At Mora's funeral in La Ruana, according to the Associated Press, hundreds of residents turned out. A photograph displayed at his wake showed Mora and carried a quote attributed to him. It said, "We rose up because we had nothing to lose. That is what the autodefensas were. They were people who had nothing left to lose. They were lime farmers and cattle ranchers and shopkeepers and doctors and students and mothers and fathers who decided that dying while fighting was better than living on their knees. They proved that ordinary people with hunting rifles and pickup trucks and white t-shirts could drive out a cartel that the Mexican army could not. And then they proved something else. They proved that fighting the monster does not mean you will not become one. And they proved that even when you win, the war does not end." Michoacán is still waiting for peace. It was waiting before the autodefensas. It was waiting during the autodefensas. And it is waiting still. If you enjoyed this video essay, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.